Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today we will talk about my first job interview. Are you ready? Let's go. When I think about my first job interview, I can still remember every detail as if it happened yesterday, even though it's been years, and the memories are still fresh in my mind because it was such a nerve-wracking yet unforgettable experience that taught me so much about myself, my strengths, my weaknesses, and how to prepare for life's unexpected moments. It all started on a rainy Thursday morning when I received an unexpected email from a company I had applied to weeks earlier but had almost given up hope on, and suddenly I was filled with excitement, fear, and self-doubt all at once, wondering if I was really ready for something like this because, to be honest, I had never been to a real job interview before, not one that counted anyway, and all those mock interviews in school felt completely useless in comparison to the real thing, so I immediately called my best friend, Maria, who had been through a few interviews already, and she gave me tons of advice, from what to wear to how to answer the classic questions like, tell me about yourself, and, what are your strengths and weaknesses, which at first sounded cliché but turned out to be harder to answer than I expected, and after hanging up, I ran to my closet and started trying on outfits, realizing that nothing I owned looked remotely professional, so I borrowed a blazer from my cousin and paired it with the only pair of black pants I had. And although it didn't match perfectly, I told myself it was good enough. Because confidence mattered more than fashion, or at least that's what I kept repeating to calm myself down, and then came the big day. I woke up at 6 a.m. even though the interview was at 10, but I wanted to give myself enough time to shower, eat a proper breakfast, and go over the company's website one more time, memorizing their mission, values, recent projects, and anything else that might come up. Because I didn't want to be caught off guard, and then I left the house way earlier than necessary because I was paranoid about being late, and of course, I ended up arriving almost an hour early, which was both a blessing and a curse because while I had time to collect myself, I also had more time to feel nervous, and I remember sitting in the waiting area with my hands sweating, my heart racing, and trying to look calm while going over my notes on my phone for the 100th time, and then finally, the receptionist called my name, and I stood up, smiled, and followed her to a small, glass-walled meeting room where the interviewer, a man named Mr. Thompson, was waiting for me with a kind but professional smile, and as I shook his hand, I realized that the moment I had been dreading had finally arrived, but surprisingly, once we started talking, some of the fear melted away, especially when he asked me to tell him about myself, and I realized I had practiced that line so many times that it actually sounded natural, and as the interview went on, he asked about my studies, my interest in the role, a time when I faced a challenge, and how I dealt with it, and although I stumbled a bit on that one, I managed to pull myself together and tell a decent story about a group project in college where I had to mediate a conflict between two team members, and I think he appreciated my honesty and the way I handled it because he nodded and took notes, and then he asked what I knew about the company. And I was so glad I had done my research because I was able to talk about their latest product launch and how I thought it aligned with their mission, and I even asked a question about their plans for international expansion, which seemed to impress him, and finally, after what felt like hours but was probably just 30 minutes, he smiled and said, "Well, thank you for coming in today, it was a pleasure speaking with you." And I shook his hand again and walked out of the building feeling like I had just finished a marathon, partly relieved, partly anxious about the outcome, but mostly proud of myself for getting through it, and I treated myself to a large iced coffee on the way home as a reward, and the next few days were a blur of overthinking, replaying the interview in my head, wondering if I said the right things, if I smiled enough, if I talked too much or too little, and then, just when I had convinced myself they had chosen someone else, I got a call from Mr. Thompson himself, offering me the position, and I almost dropped my phone out of shock, but I managed to thank him calmly while jumping up and down in my living room after hanging up, and that moment was a turning point in my life, because not only did it mark the beginning of my professional journey, but it also showed me that sometimes, when you push through fear and self-doubt, you come out stronger on the other side, and every time I face a new challenge now, I remember that rainy Thursday, the nerves, the shaky hands, the small glass-walled room, and the voice inside me that said, "You can do this," because that day, I proved to myself that I really could. So we come to the end of our podcast today. Thank you very much for completing the episode and we'll see you in the next one. See you soon.